My parents took credit for my scholarship to look good at church. We raised her right, they said. My sister winked. I let them bask in it, until I handed the pastor something they didn't expect. My parents, Helen and Marvin Granger, loved appearances more than anything. More than truth, more than relationships, more than us. My sister Denise and I grew up knowing that the best way to get by was to stay quiet and look good. She did it by being pretty and friendly. I did it by staying invisible. If I wasn't noticed, I couldn't be blamed. From the time I was 12, I started spending every extra moment at the town library. It started as an escape, air conditioning and silence, but eventually became my second home. Books became my way out of our suffocating house, and eventually, I started tutoring younger kids there after school for a little money. My parents barely noticed. They'd never asked about my grades, never went to a parent-teacher meeting. But that didn't stop them from using my quiet behavior to pad their image at church. "She's such a good girl," people would say. "Y'all must be doing something right." And they'd smile. They always smiled. When I got to high school, I took every AP class I could. I studied during lunch, during choir practice, on the bus. I knew I had no money for college, and I knew my parents weren't going to help. They talked a big game about hard work and earning things, but I'd never seen them lift a finger when it came to my future. Denise, on the other hand, was their princess. They doted on her every move. If she passed math class, we'd have dinner at Olive Garden. If she got a part in the school play, even as a tree, they'd throw a little congrats party. Me? I came in second place in a statewide essay contest once and found the certificate in the trash 2 days later. But I didn't care, not really. I had a plan. That plan came together when I applied for a full-ride scholarship to the University of Chicago. I spent 3 months working on the application. Every night after homework, I'd write, rewrite, and edit my essays. I'd spend hours researching what the scholarship committee looked for. I even used money from tutoring to pay for the application fees and to take the SAT twice to improve my score. I didn't tell my parents I applied. I didn't tell anyone, really. Not even Denise. When the acceptance letter came, I sat on the porch and just stared at it. My hands were shaking. I felt dizzy. A full ride. Tuition, housing, books, all of it. All mine. I didn't even cry right away. I just felt stunned. Like someone finally saw me. I told my guidance counselor first, Ms. Renner. She was the only adult in my life who ever seemed to care. She teared up and hugged me. She said, "Camille, I knew you'd do something big." She must have shared the news with the principal, because a week later, during a school assembly, they called me on stage and announced it in front of everyone. The clapping felt like background noise. I was still wrapping my head around the fact that I was really leaving. But that's when the trouble began. That Sunday at church, the whispers had already started. I overheard Mrs. Blaylock in the vestibule tell someone, "Did you hear about Camille Granger? Full ride to some fancy school in Chicago. Lord, Helen and Marvin must be so proud." And like clockwork, Pastor Wilkins invited us up to the front during service. I didn't want to go up there. I didn't even like being noticed, much less being displayed. But my mother grabbed my arm and smiled through her teeth. "Come on, darling. It's your moment." We stood in front of the whole congregation. I could feel my face burning. Then my father took the microphone. "We raised her right," he said, with this phony sincerity he put on whenever he was performing for others. "Kept her in church, made sure she had discipline, taught her the value of hard work." My mother nodded along like some proud pageant mom. "We always told her, the Lord rewards those who stay humble and focused." I was frozen. I wanted to scream. They hadn't helped me fill out a single application. They never once asked about my college plans. They didn't even know I'd applied. But here they were, soaking up applause like they'd personally written my scholarship essay. And then I looked at Denise. She was sitting in the front row, arms crossed, and when our eyes met, she winked. It was small, quick. But it felt like a punch in the stomach. It was confirmation. She knew. She knew they were full of it. And she thought it was funny. After service, the floodgates opened. People hugged my parents, complimented them, and told them they were an inspiration. A few even asked if they'd consider giving a parenting talk at the next youth retreat. I stood off to the side while they smiled and nodded and played the role they always loved. I barely made it through the potluck. Later that night, I sat at the library with a spiral notebook and began writing. I wasn't sure what I was doing at first, just pouring it all out. Everything I'd done to get here. Every part-time job. Every late night. Every time I'd walk home in the dark after tutoring because I didn't want to ask them for a ride and be reminded of what a burden I was. By midnight, I had 8 pages. I turned it into a letter. A testimony, I guess, if we're using church words. I attached copies of my scholarship paperwork, the essay I submitted, and a list of every job I'd held since sophomore year. No anger. No insults. Just facts. Truth. I printed it and put it in a manila envelope addressed to Pastor Wilkins. And the next Sunday, I handed it to him. I didn't stick around to see him open it. That Sunday, I sat further back than usual, left side, near the windows. I figured if things went sideways, I'd at least have a quick escape route. I didn't tell my parents I had handed the pastor the envelope. I didn't tell anyone. The whole morning, they were beaming, soaking in the leftover praise from the previous week. I watched my mom accept compliments on my behalf like she'd birthed and raised a Nobel laureate. "God really blessed y'all with that one," Miss Patty, one of the old choir ladies, said to her. "Well, we did our part," my mom replied, smiling modestly. "We always kept our girls on the right path." My dad, of course, threw in another line about discipline and traditional values. I just sat there quietly, like I always did. Pastor Wilkins made no mention of my letter during service. He delivered a sermon on humility and truth, which was interesting timing. I noticed he didn't call us up to the front again. In fact, he barely made eye contact with my parents during the entire service. I saw his eyes land on me twice, quick glances, like he was checking if I was still breathing. After church, I slipped out the side door before anyone could say anything. My parents didn't even notice I was gone until they got home. That evening, Pastor Wilkins called our landline. I picked it up before it could ring a second time. It was instinct. Like I'd been waiting for it. "Camille," he said softly. "I read your letter." There was a long pause. I didn't know what to say. "I want to thank you for sharing that with me," he continued. "It was brave. It was honest. Would you consider reading it at youth night this Friday?" I almost dropped the phone. My throat tightened. "You want me to read it?" "If you're willing," he said. "I think the young people in this church need to hear it. They need to know what real work looks like." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to curl into a ball and hide. But another part, the part that had worked 3 jobs and studied in secret and wrote 8 pages in a fit of quiet rage, knew this was exactly what I needed to do. I said yes. That week passed like a slow-motion car crash. My mom floated around the house humming hymns and planning what she'd wear on Friday. My dad talked about how proud he was that I was being given the spotlight again. They assumed Pastor Wilkins had asked me to speak about my future or maybe do a reading. They had no idea what I was going to say. Denise figured it out, though. She caught me printing extra copies of my letter on Wednesday night. "You're gonna tell them, aren't you?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe of my room. I didn't answer right away. "You're gonna ruin it for them." "I'm going to tell the truth." She didn't look mad. If anything, she looked amused. Like she knew it was coming all along. "Good," she said after a moment. "Someone should." And then she walked away. Friday night came fast. I wore a plain navy dress, nothing fancy. I brought my folder and my notes and prayed I wouldn't faint. The fellowship hall was full. Youth night always drew a crowd. There were snacks, music, and games. And then testimonies. That's what they called it, sharing your walk. Pastor Wilkins introduced me without much preamble. He said, "Camille Granger has something important to share tonight. I encourage everyone to listen closely." My legs shook as I walked to the front. I looked out at the room, kids I'd gone to school with, older couples from church, the choir ladies, Denise, and of course, my parents. They sat dead center. My mother had her hands clasped like she was praying. My father looked proud. That wouldn't last. I took a deep breath and began. "I'm grateful to be here tonight. I've been asked to share something personal, not just about where I'm going, but how I got here. I pulled out the first page of the letter. What I'm about to read isn't a story about perfect parenting or easy success. It's about work. Real work. And what it takes to build something when no one's helping you. And then I read. Word for word. I told them how I got the scholarship. How I worked at the library 5 days a week and cleaned houses on Saturdays. How I studied late into the night while my parents watched TV. How I filled out every scholarship application alone. I told them about the rejection letters. About how I used tutoring money to buy a second-hand laptop. How my parents had no idea what schools I'd even applied to. I didn't blame. I didn't accuse. I just told the truth. About halfway through, I looked up and saw my mother's face, stone still. My father was staring at the floor. Denise looked like she was holding back a laugh. When I finished, the room was dead silent. And then, slowly, someone started clapping. Then another. And another. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't like in movies. But it was real. People saw me. For the first time in my life, people saw me. Afterward, a few people came up to talk to me. One of the youth group girls hugged me and whispered, "Thank you for saying it." I thought I was the only one who had to do things alone. Pastor Wilkins said nothing in front of others. But as I left, he handed me a small folded piece of paper. "You did good tonight," he said. "No matter what anyone says." Inside the note, it simply read, "The truth will set you free." The ride home after youth night was silent. My parents didn't say a word to me in the car. Not a word. My mom kept her eyes on the road like it was a battlefield, lips pressed tight, hands clenching the steering wheel. My dad sat in the passenger seat with his jaw locked, his gaze aimed out the window into the dark like there was something out there more interesting than his own daughter setting fire to the little facade they'd built over 18 years. Denise sat beside me in the back seat, chewing gum slowly. She didn't say anything either, but there was something smug in her posture, arms folded, one leg crossed over the other like she'd just witnessed something deliciously dramatic and had no regrets about it. We pulled into the driveway, headlights sweeping across our chipped garage door. My mom turned off the ignition but didn't move. None of us did. Then my dad finally spoke. "Well, you certainly had a lot to say tonight." I didn't respond. "You embarrassed us," my mother said flatly, still not looking at me. In front of the entire church. I wanted to ask what exactly I'd said that wasn't true. But I didn't. I didn't owe them a debate. Not after what I had shared. If they couldn't hear it when it was laid bare in front of a whole room, they never would. So I opened the door and got out. I walked inside, up the stairs, into my room. I closed the door, sat on my bed, and waited. I wasn't sure what, maybe for someone to come argue, yell, plead. But no one did. That was almost worse. The next morning, I came downstairs for breakfast and found a new silence had settled into the walls. The same kitchen. The same old cabinets. The same weak coffee smell. But no words. My mom passed me a plate of eggs without a glance. My dad read the newspaper like nothing had happened. Denise, again, was the only one who acknowledged me. She raised an eyebrow, just slightly, then went back to scrolling her phone. And that's how it went for the next few weeks. A strange kind of détente. My parents didn't yell. They didn't confront each other. But they also didn't look at me the same way. If they looked at me at all. It was like I had punctured something they thought was sacred. Their image. Their pride. Their narrative. Every now and then, someone from church would approach me in town, at the grocery store, at the diner where I picked up Sunday shifts, and quietly thank me for my honesty. "You were brave," they'd whisper. Not many would have said that out loud. Even Miss Patty from the choir pulled me aside one Sunday after service. "I think I understand now," she said softly. "We don't always know what goes on in a home." That was a reminder. Some even started treating my parents differently, not cold, just more cautious. More aware. I noticed my mom started skipping the ladies' Bible brunches she used to organize religiously. My dad wasn't quite as quick to volunteer for leading prayer at the men's group. Their shine had dulled just a bit. Denise, meanwhile, started spending more time with me. I wasn't sure why at first. She'd never exactly been my confidant. We were sisters, sure, but distant ones. We shared a roof, but not much else. But after youth night, she began popping into my room more often. Sitting on the edge of my bed, asking questions like, "What's Chicago like in the winter?" Or, "Do you think you'll meet smart people there?" It took me a while to understand that it wasn't sarcasm. She was actually curious. Maybe even admiring me a little. One night, she came into my room holding a red spiral notebook, the one I used to scribble college essay drafts and to-do lists in. "I read this," she said. "I know I shouldn't have. But I did." I braced myself. She sat down, crossed her legs, and said, "You really did it all yourself, didn't you?" "Yeah," I said, quietly. She picked at the spiral wire. "They never helped me either," she said, eyes on the notebook. "They just liked how I looked in pictures." We sat there in the quiet for a long while. "I'm not like you," she added eventually. "I don't have a plan. I don't know how to do what you did." I didn't have the words for that then. I still don't really. But I think that was the closest she ever came to saying she was proud of me. And for what it's worth, I think it meant more than anything my parents could have said. As the summer went on, my parents mostly pretended like youth night had never happened. My mom threw herself into packing me a send-off basket filled with Bible devotionals and herbal teas I would never use. My dad checked the oil in my used Honda Civic twice a week like it was the only way he could still feel in control of something. No apologies. No admissions. But I didn't need them anymore. Because I'd said what needed to be said. And everyone had heard it. Move-in day at the University of Chicago was a mix of adrenaline and surreal quiet. It was crisp for early September, cooler than Oak Ridge had ever been that time of year. The city buzzed with a kind of energy that made me feel both terrified and completely at home at the same time. I parked on a side street, walked to my dorm with one heavy suitcase and 2 boxes. No hugs, no photos, no family caravan. Just me. I got everything up the 3 flights of stairs by myself. It sounds sad, maybe. But it wasn't. I felt free. I was on my own terms, breathing fresh air in a life I had earned, not inherited. My roommate, Jayla, was the complete opposite of me, bold, funny, wore rainbow socks and made microwave ramen at 10 a.m., and yet, she became one of my first real friends. The kind of friend who asked questions about my life and listened, even when the answers were messy or awkward. College was hard at first. Being poor in a place full of kids with money was its own education. I learned quickly how to stretch leftover dining hall food into weekend meals and how to smile politely when others talked about ski trips and internships through family friends. But I also found professors who believed in me. Advisors who gave me opportunities. Peers who challenged and inspired me. For the first time, I belonged to a world that wasn't built on performance, but on potential. Meanwhile, back in Oak Ridge, things began to shift. I hadn't planned on revenge. Not really. But life has a way of handing you the right opportunity when you've earned it. It came during my second year of college. I had taken on a paid summer research assistantship working under a sociologist who focused on rural education gaps. Part of the job involved interviewing students from underfunded areas, kids like me. I designed a program proposal about the realities of financial and emotional neglect in high-achieving teens from conservative households. I even included excerpts from my own experience, anonymized, of course. My professor was impressed. She encouraged me to present it at a youth development conference in Nashville. I went. And unexpectedly, someone in the audience that day was a representative from the Tennessee State Education Board. 2 months later, I was asked if I'd be willing to write a column for a new education equity initiative they were piloting, something honest, grounded, personal. I said yes. I wrote a piece called "The Myth of the Selfless Parent, When Silence Isn't Support." It told the story of a student, no names, who was praised publicly for her success while privately unsupported and overlooked. The piece was raw, but never angry. Honest, but not cruel. It went viral within the state's education circles. The church newsletter printed an excerpt. Local papers picked it up. It passed around Oak Ridge like wildfire. And that's when my real revenge took shape, not through fire or fury, but through exposure. My parents became the unspoken subtext of a growing conversation. People didn't say their names, but they knew. They knew who had stood at the front of the church claiming credit for a girl they barely knew. It wasn't just gossip this time. It was a reflection. I heard from Denise that after the article made its rounds, people stopped asking my parents for parenting advice. Invitations slowed. My mom resigned from the church planning committee. My dad stopped volunteering at the youth men's group. I never once said their names. I never needed to. The truth, once spoken aloud, did the work on its own. That Christmas, I went back to Oak Ridge for a brief visit, not for them, but to see Ms. Renner and a couple of old friends. My parents were stiff. Polite. A bit too careful. My mom kept avoiding eye contact. My dad asked a few half-hearted questions about school. I answered them plainly. Then, just before I left, Denise slipped something into my hand. A folded note. I read it once I got back to Chicago. It said, "They know. They just can't say it. You did what I never could. And I'm proud of you." That was the real closure. Years later, I graduated with honors and went on to work in education policy. I now run a nonprofit that provides scholarship mentoring to low-income high school students, especially those from rural areas. We focus on students who aren't loud or flashy, but who burn with quiet determination. I never told my story again in public by name. But I see pieces of it in every kid I work with. Sometimes they ask me why I do what I do. Why do I care so much? And I tell them, because someone tried to write my story for me. And I took the pen back. That was my revenge. Not the applause. Not the awkward silences my parents now endure. Not even the shifting eyes at church. My revenge was living a full, honest life, and turning my story into a path for others to walk down without shame. And that, I promise you, was far sweeter than any dramatic takedown. That was justice. That was freedom. That was mine.